Francesca Block, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
The story today is Black Nationalist gets $20 million to promote segregation in public schools. Give us a kind of overview of what this story is about.
So the story is about a guy in Philadelphia. His name is Sharif El-Mekki, and he is a former teacher, a former principal, who went on to found his own nonprofit in 2019. And the nonprofit has kind of a very simple and in a lot of ways laudable goal, which is to get more Black educators in public education, more Black teachers. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you don't even have to go that deep into kind of into El-Mekki's philosophy, into kind of what he advocates for, you realize that what he's really pushing for is for Black students to basically only be taught by Black educators, which in theory leads to an idea of school segregation.
I would say in practice.
Yes, in practice, sorry.
The Center for Black Educator Development, and I'm going to read something here because you outlined the fact that he believes that Black students should be taught by Black teachers, but they describe the goal of education as a, quote, political act that can, quote, upend white supremacy and a racist history of using education as an oppressive social force. You know, I don't mind if people have these views that I disagree with, but it seems like they're getting a lot of money not only from the state of Pennsylvania, which is problematic, but from foundations, like big foundations, the Gates Foundation, the Bezos people, NBC Universal. Does anyone pay attention to these organizations they're actually giving money to?
I mean, I think that's a huge question. And the answer truly is when you start to go through these organizations, it's all public record. You can go and see their tax forms and you look at where they're donating money. I mean, they're giving hundreds of millions of dollars every year to hundreds of different organizations. And truly, I mean, you could probably spend days upon days digging into each of these different organizations and realizing that maybe these organizations haven't fully understood where they're putting their money. With that being said, you know, when it comes to the Center for Black Educator Development, as you said, not only are they getting money from big foundations like Bezos, the Gates Foundation, et cetera, they're also, and El-Mekki is a part of the institutions that shape education policy in Pennsylvania and beyond. They have contracts with the Philadelphia school system, with the New York City school system, with many others across the country where they do teacher development and teacher trainings.
So what is that? You have a contract with the school system in New York City or in Pennsylvania. What does that require of you? You're going in and training individual teachers, you're doing sort of summer sessions. What does it look like?
So, I mean, whatever they do is very dependent on whatever that contract states that they're being contracted to do. In New York City, you know, they developed these guidelines, and there's a big project that they did where their logo's on it, the New York City Department of Education's logo's on it. Same with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. In Philadelphia, they were contracted to do summer schools for students. And the idea of the summer schools was to provide, you know, additional schooling for students, which again, it sounds all very good, but then when you start to realize what's being taught to students, that essentially activism should be a part of their everyday life. And, you know, the idea of these summer schools too is that they can train students to become teachers one day. And so they want teachers to then teach students that activism should be a part of their life. And it sounds nice.
It's an ideological program, right?
Yes.
I mean, activism, look, we get very upset. And look, I understand some of the complaints about people like Ron DeSantis in Florida in maybe the politicization of education from a kind of right-leaning perspective. This kind of stuff doesn't seem to get much attention because, you know, you dig into some of these organizations and it's not that they don't mean well. Fine if you mean well, but they're also trying to teach a kind of worldview and ideology, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a part of the big concern with an organization like this gaining so much power, and it's why people have pushed back so strongly in states like Pennsylvania against this idea of, you know, for lack of a better term, DEI embedded into curriculum, embedded into the structure of public education. In Pennsylvania, they passed kind of a framework that El-Mekki, an organization he works with, was a part of creating. That was, I think it's the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. They have that in New York City and other school districts around the country too. And school districts in Pennsylvania actually sued to try to stop the implementation of this curriculum. One superintendent of a school district said this is literally indoctrination, not education. And I think you're seeing now people starting to push back and saying, no, I want my kids learning reading and math. I don't necessarily want this to be a part of what teachers are now required to be teaching students.
You open the piece by mentioning somebody who is in the news, a couple months ago, and I think that people in the Harris campaign probably wish at this point that they had chosen him, but Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Sharif El-Mekki is an advisor to the Pennsylvania governor, who is Jewish, right? And he, Sharif El-Mekki, as you point out, does pal around with people in the Nation of Islam, for instance, one of the most kind of mainstream anti-Semitic organizations in the country. Did you talk to the Shapiro people about this?
So the Shapiro campaign didn't want to comment for this story, or not campaign, his administration didn't want to comment for this story. So El-Mekki served on the transition team for Governor Shapiro when he came into office a few years ago. And so El-Mekki, there were different kind of working groups as a part of that transition team, and he was on a working group focusing specifically on K through 12 education. So it's unclear to me, frankly, how connected El-Mekki's philosophy is to what Governor Shapiro is now trying to do as governor. As I said, they didn't want to comment, so it's really hard to know.
But he's currently not an advisor, as far as you know.
As far as I know, he's not currently an advisor, though he does work with a group that then worked with the Department of Education to develop the statewide curriculum, and so he really is embedded in all of the different structures and institutions in Pennsylvania that shape the future of education in the state.
I want to point something out here, because I found this piece fascinating, and particularly in the biographical details about El-Mekki. You don't kind of blame somebody for the sins of their father if their parents do something, but I thought it was really fascinating, and maybe helps to explain something, that he moved with his family to Iran in the 1980s. Is that right?
Yeah, it must have been around that time.
It was after the revolution.
Yeah, after the revolution.
And said, that his family wanted to witness a country united in its efforts to make a change. I mean, would it raise the hackles of anyone if somebody that was getting a lot of money from the New York City government to teach kids was part of a family who moved to South Africa during apartheid and said, well, kind of interesting, isn't it? Maybe check this out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want anyone teaching who says that he's impressed by Iran, that they produce so many doctors, despite the fact that they're a small country. Iran is an enormous country. It's 90 million people, and it's a big landmass. I mean, the background's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, it is. And the quote that you read about why his family moved to Iran, that came from a biography that was written about El-Mekki's mother after she passed away a couple years ago. And there are a lot of details in that biography about not only did they move to Iran, but they moved to Iran because they really admired the Iranian regime. That was one of the motivating factors behind the move. And so I do think that
don't usually go in that direction.
Right.
America's seen a lot of Iranians come here. Yeah.
And so I do think that that's something that's important to know, especially for somebody, again, he's got almost $20 million in the bank now for his nonprofit from all of these different big players.
Yeah.
And, I think it's an important detail to know. And on top of that, I don't know what he thinks about the Iranian regime now. There's not a ton of public statements in that respect, but he has praised the Iranian education system very recently.
Yes.
And he has other associations that I think are important to point out as well. He is a proud member of the Black Panther Party. So actually on his nonprofit's website, in the kind of About Us section, there's a picture of him, and he's wearing a Black Panther t-shirt. As you mentioned, he's also been featured on Louis Farrakhan's blog. There's a couple different times where he's quoted in pieces on that blog, and they refer to him.
Final call.
The final call, yes. And
yeah.
They call him a master educator. And so I do think that for somebody that's getting public money and who is influencing the future of education in this country, it's important to know, who are their backers, who do they associate with, and do they uphold American values?
Yeah. Surprisingly, I've never been praised by the Nation of Islam, and nobody I know has either. It's when you have that kind of company, it's probably time to reassess your ideas. Francesca Block, thanks for writing this. We'll be looking out for more, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks.